Good afternoon and welcome to the latest in our series of live career webinars brought to you by HOP, which is the Hertfordshire Opportunities Portal. It's a website that we hope that all of you who are students and attend schools and colleges in Hertfordshire will become aware of, because HOP is your one-stop shop for careers, information and resources that will help you make the best choices about your future career destinations. Now, the purpose of these webinars is to give you the opportunity to hear from people who are working in roles or in industries that you are interested in finding out more about. So this is very much your opportunity today to find out from our three panelists who can tell you about their roles within environmental sustainability. So firstly, for those of you that are watching this session live, so it's Thursday afternoon at the moment, well done for coming home from school and investing your time to come and join a careers webinar. So we really hope that you will get a lot of information and a lot of inspiration out of this session. We plan the session to run for about an hour. It is being recorded, so if there's bits of it you miss that you want to come and you want to re-watch, you will be able to. All of the videos are available on our HOP platform, which I'll share with you throughout the session. If you find something really interesting in this one and you know that one of your friends or one of your classmates might be interested as well, then you can share it with them as well. Just a bit of housekeeping before we go on. Hopefully you can see and hear us very well, but just to reassure you, we can't see or hear any of you guys, but you do have the opportunity to interact with us, and the way that you can do that is by on your dashboard finding the questions tab, and on the questions tab it will open out and then a text box will open out, and in that text box you can type in your question. It will only be visible to me and then I can direct it to whichever of our panelists it's most appropriate for. If you specifically want to direct it to one of them, then just put their name at the front of it, then I'll know to send it on to them. So throughout this session we are going to find out, what does environmental sustainability mean as a career? We'll think about the different skills, qualities and qualifications that you might need that might really help you to choose your GCSEs or A-levels or degree program, and what are the most enjoyable aspects of the role as well. But before we go on, I'd like to introduce our panelists who I'm delighted have joined us today. So I'm going to get them all to introduce themselves to you. So firstly, good afternoon to Emma. Could you tell us a little bit about you, Emma?
Yeah, sure. So I am Emma Cantu and I am the Sustainability Officer for Broxbourne Borough Council, which is in Hertfordshire.
Thank you very much, Emma, and good afternoon, Jim.
Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, thanks for having us. My name is Jim White. I'm a Principal Consultant for Nature Positive. Nature Positive is a management consultancy focused on nature, as you probably guessed, and we're part of the wider RSK group.
Thank you very much, Jim, and good afternoon, Amelia.
Hi everyone, my name is Amelia and I am a ecological assistant at RSK Biosensors, which Jim also works for. There's Nature Positive and RSK Wilding that are sister companies to the wider ecology company.
Thank you. And then Amelia, just to clarify, RSK Wilding have got a number of sites. So although you're not located in Hertfordshire, I know that RSK does have a site in Hemel Hempstead.
Yes,
mistaken.
RSK has multiple offices across the UK. So I'm down in Bristol today, and they have offices in Bath and North and South, so everywhere around really.
Fantastic. Okay, so what I'm going to start with a number of questions. Now, for those of you that are watching this, you may well have submitted a question when you registered to attend that. So I've compiled some of those and hopefully we've incorporated those questions that you had into the main body of the webinar. But again, it's your opportunity to ask your own questions. So anything that comes up that you think of that you want to know, whether it's about specifically about the types of jobs that Emma, Jim and Amelia actually perform on a day-to-day basis, or perhaps you've got some wider thoughts or questions about perhaps the ethics involved with environmental sustainability, then very, very keen to get your questions in and we'll get you some good answers for those as well. So first of all, look, I just want to find out, and in fact, I'm going to ask Jim this question. Jim, can you just try and explain to us, what do we mean by environmental sustainability?
There is a definition, and I can't remember exactly where the definition came from, but essentially sustainability is all around making sure we can achieve what we need to do in the current tense, but still ensure that future generations can do the same. So environmental sustainability is very much focusing on the planet and the planet's resources. So that being, the nature in all its forms of animals and plants. It's it's the weather, it's the climate, it's the water, it's fresh water. All of these different aspects, and making sure that that continues in a way that the future generations, in hundreds or thousands of years, can continue to reap those benefits.
Sure, okay, I think that sounds like a really good definition there of environmental sustainability. But what I want to do now is I just want to ask the three of you just to explain what you do on a day-to-day basis within your job, and I think that will help set the context a little bit more. So, Emma, you work for a local authority in Hertfordshire, so Broxbourne. So anyone that's watching from sort of Cheshunt or Hoddesdon or nearby will be familiar with Broxbourne. But I suspect that there are your equivalents in the other districts across Hertfordshire as well. But tell us, Emma, what does your day-to-day look like? What sort of things are concerning you?
So to be honest, I don't really have like a fixed routine day to day. Every day is really different because sustainability is such, it's a massive concept, and obviously it covers so many topics. And I suppose that's the nice thing about being a sustainability officer, is that you don't have the same thing to do every day. So fundamentally, I was employed in order to implement the environmental strategy that was written by Broxbourne. It's a 4-year plan which we're looking to implement, which ultimately is looking to reduce carbon emissions, increase biodiversity, and make our local businesses and our residents more sustainable, obviously by leading by example. So there's that part of it. There is the project side of looking at reducing our carbon emissions. So that's something which I'm working on currently at the moment, and will be working alongside a consultant very soon. I'm also looking at biodiversity audits that are happening across the borough. So we're looking at identifying habitats that could do with a little bit of uplift. So perhaps they've been mismanaged in the past. So we're actually looking to see what would be appropriate to replace them with, or if they just need a little bit of help in order to get that species gain. I do work with the county council as well. So all of the officers, like you say, we do have officers that sit with all the local authorities and districts, and we all come together under Herts County Council, under a partnership. And it's great that we have the collaborative approach, because we're all going to have different bits and pieces going. We all know of funding perhaps that could be relevant to residents, it could be community projects, it could be for us to decarbonise. So those are all things that we would get together and discuss. I'm vice lead of what they call a behavioural change or a positive thinking group as well, which is looking at how we can actually make more sustainable choices and how we are actually going to make those changes. So what actions and what I suppose what behaviours will we actually need to do in order to get from point A to point B, which is hopefully more sustainable actions and experiences for everybody. So it's a bit of a nutshell. I work across a lot of departments, so you'll see planning, you'll see green spaces, you'll see elected members, you'll be working with chief executives. So that's kind of a little bit of what I kind of do on a daily basis. So yeah, no day's the same.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. Well, Jim, same question to you then. What does your inbox look like on a day-to-day?
Yeah, I think echoing a lot of the same sentiments as Emma there. It is a really varied role, which works out really well for me, definitely. But from day to day, we're from the private sector, so obviously we're a bit more client dependent in terms of, a different day could be a completely different client from a completely different sector or industry. So we work with the food and drink industry, we work with clothing companies, a lot of construction work. You may have seen recently we've actually just announced a partnership with Charlton Athletics, so football as well. So it's quite a range. So depending on what stage that client is in that kind of journey towards better sustainability, we'll help with basic strategy setting and report writing to getting involved with data and data analysis and presentation, to even just researching and kind of looking wider into the industry for innovation and what we can bring to clients. So day to day, very varied, but that definitely keeps it nice and interesting.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. And then Amelia, first of all, if you just give us a reminder of what is RSK as a company, and how does your role fit into that wider network?
There's RSK Group, which has many sectors within it. So you've got water, soils, and we do ecology. So it's more of, you know, the conservational animal and species base. So as my role as an assistant ecologist, I do more of like the practical, getting out into the field, gathering survey results, and, you know, it's mostly comes in hand with development. So just ensuring that these developers are, you know, doing the right things, and say there's a tree on site and there's bats in there, that they're looked after properly, and just gathering that data to ensure that all these new developments are, yeah, set up to be how they should be, and for greater sustainability in the environment and for future generations. So yes.
Sure. Okay. Jim, let me just ask you a question. I mean, it sounds like every company, every organisation, whether it's a local authority, whether it's a construction company, whether it's a football club, they all need to have people concerned with their environmental sustainability. So presumably there are so many more jobs in this field now than there would have been 10, 20 years ago.
Yeah. I mean, I must admit, 10, 20 years ago, I probably wasn't even in the industry yet. I think I was a bit young, but yeah, it seems to be very much a growth sector. I think, yeah, to echo your point, every single business will have some impact on the environment and some dependency on the environment, whether it is quite immediate or obvious, so things like farming and producing food, or construction, as we've mentioned, needs to actively change land to something else. But sometimes it's a little bit more nuanced, so it might be through the supply chain or the wider value chain. So if we look at the financial industry, it is slowly starting to understand the importance they have in how they invest their money and what that goes into and what impact that has. So we're starting to work more with investors on what they call their ESG strategy. So as environmental, I've definitely forgot the acronym now, sustainability and governance, but it's essentially looking at those aspects and stipulations that they need to do the right amount of due diligence to ensure they're not having an adverse impact on either the environment or potentially in certain communities and stuff as well.
Okay, Amber, I'm just keen for you to share a bit about your background and your route into the role that you're doing at the moment. Think back to when you were 15, 16 and at secondary school. Did you envisage becoming a sustainability officer? Was that always your passion?
That was so long ago. To be honest, I think from a very early age, I was always into natural environment, definitely. For me, my interest came primarily from ornithology. So I was definitely bird specialist, first and foremost. But I think kind of going forward, for some reason, I kind of saw it more as a hobby and something which I enjoyed, kind of more on my downtime. So even though I went out and kind of had the experience, I did my undergraduate in Japanese and East Asian studies. So it wasn't like a clear jump straight from undergraduate, postgraduate into this role. It was something which I took a little bit of time in doing. And to be honest, when I did decide, actually, I do want to go into this sector, the jobs that I was looking at, I was basically told, you'd stand a much higher chance if you do a Master of Science. It's basically something which we are looking for. And at the time I was working for the University of Cambridge, and it was actually an internal role. And even though I'd had so much experience with all of the environmental projects that I did, I was an environmental coordinator. I set up a lot of sustainability projects internally, but even though I had all of that experience, they still wanted the Master of Science. So for me, I had to go back to school in order to get it. Obviously, the fact that my undergraduate was an environmentally based one probably didn't help either. But the one thing that I think also benefited was the practical experience that I did up until the meantime. So I think it would probably depend on where you're actually looking to go. but I kind of saw myself a little bit more into a conservation role, and actually me ending up a sustainability officer is because it also included biodiversity and being able to work on those projects that I then became a sustainability officer. So I'd probably say it wasn't quite clear cut, but at the same time, I'm still doing what I wanted to do, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, we'll explore the different routes into the industry. Amelia, I just want to ask you, does that resonate with you? Was ecology something you always had a huge passion for as a teenager, that you perhaps always thought might be a good career choice for you?
Yes, I mean, I never really knew what I wanted to do, but throughout all that, I knew I had passions in conservation and just the general natural environment, like Emma was saying. So I kind of just followed that really and thought, if I don't know quite what I want to do, I'll pick broad A levels. So I did geography, textiles, maths and biology, and dropped maths and carried on with the other three. I actually didn't get the grade I wanted in biology A levels, so I sat back a year and took it forward to get that grade that I wanted and needed for university. And then I had that extra year to think about what I wanted to do a bit more, and I researched subjects, and I went with zoology because it sounded amazingly interesting and it was so broad. The study of animals, it's just everything comes into it. So that offered me a bit of practical experience, lots of lab work, and then we went to the Galapagos Islands for 2 weeks. And just getting out there and just seeing the natural environment for what it was, and just learning as you go, was the best thing. And then I ended up doing a master's degree like Emma, and that came with 6 months of practical experience, which I felt I really, really needed. That you need to get out there and do the practical experience and learn as you go. And I can't stress that enough. I always thought, placement, not so sure, I'll just keep studying because that's what I'm used to. But actually, you need to translate that theory and that knowledge into the practical skills, and it benefits you instantly as soon as you do that. So and then I did my placement with RSK, and here I am a year later. So yeah, it's good.
So I mean, it sounds like from both your perspectives, you're doing something that you've got a real intrinsic passion and desire for. Jim, if I could just bring you in, because I know that you haven't necessarily been on the same route. So tell everybody about your route into the role you're doing now.
Yeah, a little bit unusual, potentially. So at university, I did construction management, and the first few years of my career were working with construction consultants, doing project management, planning, risk management, a kind of wealth of different aspects of that, which was good and interesting, but probably not where my passions really lay. And that's where, probably more in my personal life, sustainability was becoming more important and something I was actively looking to engage with. So I started looking for avenues to do the same in my previous role in construction. And as you alluded to before, with sustainability becoming kind of more topical and getting a lot more attention, that there were roles there. I managed to kind of develop myself through that, and then probably find the perfect company for me in Nature Positive. But I suppose I won't have the same technical knowledge that Amelia and Emma have, but I suppose I've got some kind of soft skills and consultancy based skills that I've developed in a similar role that I've been able to bring forward and still work in something that I'm very passionate about taking forward.
Sure. Okay, thank you. Well, I mean, it sounds like it's a good opportunity just to dip into the detail that I suspect most people will be really interested in, which is the next immediate steps that they might take. So looking at the age groups or the year groups that the people that registered have come in, it's a real mix of people between year 7 up to year 12 and 13. So first of all, Amelia, you said that you did biology and geography amongst your A levels. Would you recommend those two for someone who wants to go into this field? I mean, they sound like fairly natural subjects to take.
Yeah, I definitely would. The combination of those together, I think, would give you such a good foot to go from, because you could go down more of the theory route and the natural environment and natural world route with geography, if you wanted to take your studying forward and do dissertations and the proper theory of it, or you could take biology and turn it into more of the animal sector, and get straight out there and do practical things. Either way, I think just keeping it broad and making sure you've got that footing that you can go in all these directions, because this sector is so broad in itself. So it's better to start that way, with at least biology is a really, really good one. I see that a lot as a requirement. So that's why I stayed back and made sure I got it at the best grade I could to take it forward, which, yeah, I'd recommend to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Emma and Jim, I'll let either of you come in here, but it sounds like from what Amelia's saying there, I mean, that seems very logical, that combination of biology and geography. Any other obvious subjects you think, Jim?
Yeah, I was just thinking if I had my time again, what I would go back and study instead. And they just constantly seem to be kind of new courses that you see on new names. But I think, yeah, biology, zoology, ecology, anything in that is kind of where my passions would lie. Yeah, environmental sciences and stuff like that would probably be something that I would look to do if I had my time again.
Sure, okay. And then, well, Emma, let me just take it on to that next step then. We're thinking about university. I mean, first of all, I'll be saying that really someone needs to go and get a degree to go and get a job within environmental sustainability.
I think it's kind of hard to say that as a broad statement. I would recommend it, but to be honest, depending on what you're actually looking to go into, it could be that it might not be the case that you need, for example, a master's. It could be that they're happy with the experience of a bachelor's degree. I think obviously in my own situation, it was that I had to do that, but obviously I think that was because of my undergraduate choice, and my A-level choices were obviously like completely different. I did law and government and politics, and I was looking to do more of like an international role, until I realized I really wanted to come back to obviously like my prime interests, as it were. So I think I would definitely encourage the routes that obviously like Amelia has done. Biology and geography and environmental sciences, zoology, they're all pretty like your baseline. They're kind of your base skills, but I would definitely say that I have noticed more and more that sustainability is now being built into all of these. So instead of it, I suppose, kind of being you need to go out and you need to do a specific sustainability course, a lot of I suppose going into like postgraduate qualifications now, even if you're doing like, for example, marine biology, it still has aspects of sustainability. So mine being wildlife conservation, it had a whole module on sustainability and communication. So it is getting to the point now of where I think it's actually allowing the student that bit more freedom and that little bit more choice, because you've now got that element built in to most of them. So it's always good just to kind of explore, depending on what you're looking to go into, just really have a look at the prospectuses, have a look at each module, see what is including, because that way you're going to see which course is going to allow you a little bit more wiggle room depending on where you want to go ultimately.
Yeah, I mean, that's fantastic, and that's really good holistic advice as well about just really checking kind of the small print of what each degree course offers and how they teach it and how they assess it. So look, I mean, if I had to put you on the spot, Emma, if you were going to go back and you were going to go and choose your undergraduate degree again, having left school, knowing what you do now, what sort of course would you choose?
To be honest, I would probably go zoology, especially because one of the main sectors of sustainability, which we're coming up a lot more in tandem, is the ecology side, the survey side, because in order for us to achieve sustainability, you're looking at expanding habitats, and you have to go out and you have to do these surveys, you have to do these audits. So it could be habitat, it could be species, it could be both. And I think being able to kind of have that fundamental knowledge of how to do that, that's built into those degrees, is really going to help, because the broader kind of subjects of sustainability, so for example, your carbon emissions, there's so much out there data-wise already kind of online that's there to help people. I think those are all things that you probably could pick up actually separately, or going on to maybe like a separate course if you did want to hone in specifically on sustainability. But I would probably say those things are there. So really kind of look, I suppose it's going back to what Amelia said, is like look for something which is a nice broad base, and that I definitely go back and I do zoology.
Yeah, okay. Well, look, Amelia, let me bring you in here because it's only fairly recently that you did your undergraduate degree. Can you just explain what sort of modules were covered within zoology?
Had marine biology, forensic zoology, invertebrates, vertebrates, everything you could possibly think of, because essentially the definition of zoology, which I learned on, during my degree, is the study of animals, and it's not necessarily what everyone thinks is, will you go and work in a zoo? It's nothing like that. It's taking actually the, your biology A level and learning biology then about animals and how they work and their ecosystems and what they depend on and how we depend on them as humans. So zoology just covers, so many modules, and you've got things like statistics skills in there and computer skills as well. We had modules on GIS, which is a geographical information system, which is what we use to map all of our surveys on these days, and it's like a modern way of grouping those habitats on a survey and coming back with all that information that you know is really key on providing that advice. So
Sure.
it did have a bit of everything in there that's helped me today, definitely.
Yeah, okay. Jim, let me just ask you the final question on this section, which is around gaining some sort of experience. Now, of course, everyone would love to go and do a week's work experience in this sort of environment, but if you can't, what sort of things would you recommend that someone go and do perhaps in their own time that might give them a bit of an understanding about what happens within this industry and the sorts of roles within it?
Yes, really good question. And I think almost anything that gives you a greater appreciation of nature and kind of what we're looking to influence and help. So things like I did some volunteering a few years ago with my local wildlife trust on some of their restoration projects. So I'm based up in Manchester, and there's some peat bog restoration not too far from here. So I think the ability to go out and understand what they're doing, why they're doing, what the benefits are, and I suppose I heard about it from a corporate angle, because obviously peat bogs sequester a lot of carbon, so it's quite a good selling point for the habitat. And then it was getting a wider appreciation of that, and then actually being able to go out on site and see what needs to happen to kind of create these healthy functioning habitats. So that would be my advice, I'd say.
Yeah, okay. And Amelia, were there any experiences perhaps you gained that you'd recommend?
Yeah, I think going out, joining your local wildlife group. If you just pop in Google local groups, there are people there that have will have the same passions as you and will be at different stages of life as you, so you can gather so many different skills from them just from listening to their experiences and what they know. And that's not a study environment, that's just we share a passion, let's talk about it. So yeah, local groups definitely. And then I guess I'd come back to work placements or voluntary placements at a company that catches your eye, even if it's more of a passion. Say you really liked football, but they did, with the Charlton Athletic, they're now looking at sustainability. You could go to a football team and ask them what they're doing for sustainability and sort of combine your passions and really create something from that and just gain experience that way, and you'll end up with hopefully your dream job. So yeah.
Yeah, okay. I mean, Emma, there was a really good question that was submitted in the registrations about what schools could do to improve their environmental sustainability, and I guess that's an environment that everyone will be in on a daily basis that perhaps they could check and challenge. But I mean, what would if someone's in school, what sort of questions do you think they should be asking? The people who maintain the school.
So I know that there is actually an eco schools program, because one of our local schools in Broxbourne, that is something that they're aspiring to. So if you are in school currently, ask about it and just see, are you part of that? Because I suppose fundamentally you should know if you are or not, and if you're not, then just ask the question, because with that it's going to obviously be looking at I suppose all elements of your school. So, is your food, where is that? Is it locally sourced? Is your paper locally sourced and the Forest Stewardship Commission approved? So the trees, are they sustainably sourced? Do you have a garden space with your school? Do you grow produce? And if so, do you use that in your kitchens? just all little things like that are all kind of like, I think, part of that, as well as obviously incorporating the syllabus when it comes to environmental studies, sustainability, learning early on about carbon and pollution and how you mitigate that. That would definitely be something which I would check out with your teachers first.
Yeah, sure. That's a really good point. Just Emma, we can mention them. Which school in Broxbourne is on that scheme?
I believe it's John Warner.
Okay. So if anyone from John Warner is listening, then well done. Your school is part of a really good initiative there, and maybe find out. And if you go to another school, yeah, it's a really good question to find out. Is your school part of that scheme? And maybe that's something that you could try and introduce to the school as well. That would look really good on a personal statement when you're applying for university, that sort of thing. Okay, I can see there's a number of questions that are being submitted, so do keep them coming into. Anything you want to know, please do ask them. I've just got a couple more questions, and actually I think this one is going to be quite a short answer actually, because we've kind of answered it already. So Jim, I'm going to ask it to you. What do we think the future demand is going to be for people in environmental sustainability roles? Is it a growing industry?
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. I as part of my role, and I think globally as well, because as part of my role, I'm doing a little bit of research into how organizations in Asia are starting to look at biodiversity, and I was lucky enough to interview a very high-ranking sustainable professional from another consultancy. And one of the key things they were saying in terms of the adoption of better standards for biodiversity in corporate is a lack of people, a lack of capability. So I think already companies are screaming out for it, and there's something called the Task Force for Climate Related Financial Disclosures, which has come in recently and driven a really big increase in the amount of business that need to report on their carbon emissions and make steps to reduce them. Following that, there's going to be a task force for nature-related financial disclosures, which will look more at biodiversity. So, these things have an impact and definitely increase the demand. So I think it's very much, a growth industry and with the ability to work over multiple other industries, because it is going to affect them all.
Yeah, absolutely. Amelia, so someone like you who's fairly new into the industry, is this something you see yourself staying in for the long term, or do you think there's some natural paths or routes into other occupations from this?
I think because it's such a, sustainability is so topical, there are going to be jobs everywhere, people everywhere thinking about what they can do to benefit and help sustainability. So I think you can tailor your knowledge and your degree to a lot of routes. For example, you could go down the marine biology research route and go on the forefront of the marine and see what's going on there in terms of, and that's a completely different side to ecology, which would, be more of just gathering that data still and in hand with developers. So it's a very different side of things. So yeah, you can tailor it to anything. And when I said earlier about the football club, for example, you've got things like fashion is becoming, increasingly looking at the sustainability industry. So you can offer your knowledge and you can go and build your knowledge in any other industry, really.
Okay, so we're painting a very rosy picture here. So if anyone is there thinking, I wonder if this is a good career to go into, then yeah, absolutely, it's a good career to go into, and particularly across Hertfordshire. And Emma, you work for one of our district councils, but Hertfordshire, like any other area of the country, there's going to continue to be this demand for people in this role. I mean, Emma, let me just bring this on a local level. What would you say are the sustainability challenges within Hertfordshire as a county?
I think, to be honest, when you're working for a local authority, obviously it depends on where you are in the country, but a lot of our fundamental issues are primarily the same. So most of our key strategies are looking at sustainable water consumption, especially in the southeast, because we're the thirstiest county is what they know us as, and yet we have the highest demand for water. So water is probably one of our most important ones. We want to make sure that it's sustainably, it's looked after, that the quality remains, especially because we've got a very rare habitat of chalk streams that are here in Hertfordshire. So ensuring that obviously our usage doesn't actually impact on those chalk streams is very important. Transport is another massive one. So we have a strategy of sustainable transport, which we're looking to roll out very soon across Hertfordshire as a whole. And obviously we want to promote active travel. So basically walking, cycling, public transport if you need motorized, trains, that kind of thing. Look to those as opposed to just jumping in a vehicle. Is it kind of a trip which you could maybe make with friends and you're pooling your resources, or jump on a bike, that kind of thing. So it's increasing our footpaths, our cycle paths. Biodiversity, that's another big one. So we are making sure that obviously if we can, well, we are fundamentally looking to increase our biodiversity. So that's something which is essentially written into a recent law. So you have the Environmental Act, and basically we now have to be achieving what's known as Biodiversity Net Gains. And again, that's something that's really important that we're trying to roll out, I think pretty much anywhere. So we want to increase all of our habitats. We want to increase all of our species counts. So those are probably like the primary areas that we're looking at, like on a local level, definitely.
Sure, and I apologise, Emma, I threw that question at you from left field, and I know you weren't expecting it, by the way, your eyes were dotting around, but you answered it very well by, yeah, no, you managed to incorporate chalk streams and transport strategy in there, so I can see that the cogs were ticking as you got into full motion there. Right, I want to go on to some of the questions that have been submitted now. So a few came in registration, which I thought were really, really good. So I'm going to ask you all to answer these now, and then there's a few more that are coming in as well as we are speaking. So if you do want to submit your own question, then please put them in now. So I mean, this one is a very overarching question. Actually, I'm going to go to Amelia first on this one. What steps would you advise the government to take in order to effectively tackle the climate crisis? And you've got a minute and a half to answer that.
That's a very good question. It's a very broad question. I think at the moment it's that poignant time that they are really gathering more information, changing up policies, changing up laws. So I think when these laws are gathered by professionals, so if they come and do workshops with people who are on the ground and gathering the data as it's coming in and looking at what businesses are doing and what's working and what's not, I think if they're gathering that information from people in businesses now and what's happening now and the change that's happened most recently, and confer all that together and make sure they're incorporating that into the laws, then hopefully that's how they will tackle it over time. By really taking into account what's happening now, and I think that would be the best approach. I mean, I was part of a workshop recently to do with dormouse licensing and gathering from professionals in the industry that have been there for sort of 20-30 years, those that are in sort of Network Rail, those that are Natural England, and just gathering all of their perspectives on this and putting it together to create the best outcome. So I think that would be the best approach.
Sure. And then Jim, if you were Environment Secretary, what would you be telling the Prime Minister to do?
So probably vastly oversimplifying this, but two elements that I'd like to see improve. One is starting to value nature more. I think we've alluded a little bit on the call to some of the wider benefits that healthy ecosystems can give us. So that could be the sequestering of carbon, that could be flood protection, that could be the pollination of crops. There is an absolute raft of what we call ecosystem benefits that occur from this. And what we're probably not very good at is really valuing them and putting them to the top of the agenda. So that would be one thing, to value nature more, because I think the UK is one of the most nature depleted countries on the globe. It's in kind of the lower quartile, I think, globally. So that's one thing. And then I suppose from a climate change perspective, and again, this is a vast oversimplification, but just we have to move away from fossil fuels. We have to find alternatives, and we have to do it as soon as possible. appreciate there's a lot of nuance in that, because you've got different interests. You've got obviously have to have the right governance in place and legislation and stuff. But they would be my two big takeaways if I could influence our government.
Okay, and Emma, your reaction when I asked Jim that question was far too animated for me not to ask you the same question. So over to you.
To be honest, because obviously both what Jim and Amelia said are fantastic answers, and I suppose working for a local authority, the one thing that I would definitely say is that the government needs to actually bring it home to people. They actually need to make it relatable in their everyday lives. And I can say that because that's something that's obviously like part of my job at the moment with working on the behavioural change group, is that when you actually make it more relatable to a person, when you actually kind of say that if climate change continues and we do have the temperature increase up to more than 1.5, it goes up to 2 plus, this is what is going to happen in your everyday life. And I think using those kind of examples of you are going to have more flooding, you are going to experience, I suppose, more heat island effects in cities, obviously, as temperatures rise. And then actually saying, but if you make these changes, if you come off the fossil fuels, like Jim says, you take your bike instead of obviously like taking the car as an easy trip up the road, that is going to accumulate to X, and that actually will then go on to possibly reversing these effects. So I think that is what I'd like to see more from the government. I think appealing to people, because it's very much kind of a global crisis, which it very rightly is, but at the same time it needs to also be, this affects every single one of us, we're all team players, so this is what we need to do, kind of thing.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And then Emma, I'm going to ask you the next question. I'm going to ask you to answer it first of all, which is around plastics. So the statement is, plastics are highly useful, cheap and versatile materials. How can they be used, produced and disposed of sustainably?
Okay, in the first place, just don't try and use them, because the number one thing is that if we make it so that they aren't in demand, then obviously there won't be the need to make them in the first place. So the number one thing that I would say with a plastics question is try and avoid the use of plastics altogether. So especially if it's something which you're looking, say for example in your school, and you want to make sure that there are no plastics involved, then you would make sure that everybody has a water bottle, a bit like what you're drinking now. Things like that. So obviously you have your travel cups, you have your plastic bottles, you use refillable shops. So there's things that are kind of popping up a little bit more and more now, eco refillable shops. So you go with like little bags or glass jars, and it's removing plastics out of the equation. So the more we can get people into those practices, then the less likely people are going to need to go to a shop just to buy a single-use plastic. If you are going to use a plastic, make sure it's recycled properly if it is recyclable. Because I mean, at least that way you kind of know if it is actually going into the recycle bin, it will ultimately get recycled. So I think as long as you're kind of looking at those measures, and I think the great thing is there's so much more new technology out there now that is replacing plastic. So cornstarch is a massive thing. It does amazing things. There's things which I'd look at and they look plastic and they're not. So maybe have a look at products to kind of see, okay, what are they made out of? Are there alternatives? Because we can get alternatives used on a more regular basis, then hopefully the use of plastics will be a thing of the past.
Yeah, okay. Amelia, anything that you want to add to that?
I would say, as much as they are versatile, as much as they are being used, I think it's sort of past the point of trying to keep that type of packaging and that type of use of plastic in the modern world. I think we are moving away from it. We have been moving away from it for a while, and I think it should keep going that direction, because you don't need them as such. You've got so many other things you can use instead. I mean, all the packaging you see in supermarkets, if you remove it and use cardboard, other things, more sustainably made things, more recycled materials that are not plastic based, you're still getting the same result from it. So I just think moving away from it completely would make most sense at this stage.
Yeah, I mean, Jim, I'm just thinking ahead the next few weeks with Easter around the corner as well. I'm hoping I'm going to get lots of Easter eggs. I know that my children are as well. But I mean, the amount of plastic packaging that comes with the Easter eggs, the way that they're placed in the boxes. I mean, are things being done with food manufacturers? What sort of conversations are going on at top end?
Yeah, I think it's definitely something on the agenda. It's hard to miss it, I think, but I think echoing both what Amelia and Emma have said, the power of the consumer can't really be underestimated. So a lot of these corporations do what they do because it's easy and they know they make money off it. So if we change how we purchase things, you know, sometimes there's an argument or you know, a negative argument for someone thinking of, you know, what impact can they have as an individual, but it's never only one individual, and if a number of us can change the way we consume and what we do, it will have a bigger change. So if we all you know, stop going to one of the big supermarkets that covers everything in plastic and go to the local grocery store grocery store that lets us take our own containers, and that's the way that the market goes, those big companies will react and they will change to affect that. So yeah, there's so found out recently, literally this about 2 days ago actually, I bought a load of protein powder and it's all in compostable packaging. So you know, something that comes in quite a big plastic looking package, but it's all compostable. So it's all, there are alternatives. So I think it's about, for us as individuals, it's about searching for those alternatives and I suppose almost supporting those industries and businesses that are starting to make those changes to hopefully influence the others to do the same.
Sure. There's a really good question, a really good point that's just come in directly to address that. So I'm going to read it as it's come in. As plastic wrap on a cucumber, for example, keeps it fresh for 3 weeks to a month longer, could it not be argued that this is more sustainable as it's less likely to produce food waste? Amelia, I'm going to throw that one to you.
Yeah, that's I mean, food waste is also a huge thing that's a problem. I feel like, I mean, I haven't researched cucumber packaging, but I feel like there are always alternatives. I don't know currently, you know, the amount of plastic that's in that packaging specifically. I don't know if there's any developments on that, any progress. But yeah, there obviously needs to be a balance, and there will be a balance, and I'm sure there are people already thinking of things like that. So that would probably be a good Google question to do after this webinar and find out.
I think that's
good point. Good point.
Absolutely, yeah. And although these questions aren't necessarily about what you do on a day-to-day basis, I think they're really good general conversations to have, because I think having some thought about things like plastic and what the government should do to tackle climate change are perhaps really good topics to have a considered thought about, because it may well be the sort of thing that you get asked about in an interview, either when you're applying to go to university or perhaps in a job interview, and just having. So that being able to provide the evidence of giving that thought to the wider questions, I think is probably a really positive thing. There's another question about how schools can become more environmentally friendly. And Emma, you mentioned the scheme that you mentioned. Could you just reference it again so that everyone's aware of it, and perhaps they can?
Yeah, it's nice and easy. It's called Eco Schools. So that was the I suppose like the program which is currently within schools. Actually, it's something which I only really, to be honest, found out about over the last week or so, because I'm actually actively engaging with all of our local schools at the moment with my line manager, because we want to know more about what schools are actually doing. So not just in our area, but obviously in terms of countywide, we'd like to know as a whole, because you have some which are turning parts of their sports fields into a green space for like small allotments, that kind of thing, or they're actually assigning that specifically because they would like that purely just for habitat, which is lovely, because they know the benefits that it brings. I think with schools at the moment, low carbon meals, so this is obviously looking at the carbon emissions that comes from the farming industry. So just making sure that the food that is actually coming in, is it local? Are you having days of where it's just veggie vegan? All of those things are obviously going to ultimately help, I think, in terms of making your school more sustainable. And just thinking of your resources, you know, what you can use, is it renewable? Is it compostable? Is it biodegradable? just all kind of things like that, things like paints, things like pens. They're all kind of questions that perhaps like you could ask your teachers. So I think with those, in terms of like starting to make your schools more friendly, obviously a massive one for us is the school drop off. And we know that obviously it's difficult because you have parents that need to travel in order to drop off their children. But if you can walk or cycle with your family, then walk or cycle. Those are all things that, yeah, straight away I would go to.
Yeah. Okay, that's a really good answer. It's a really good suggestion. Perhaps those of you watching can take this back to your schools. Another question, Jim. Jim, you might not be aware because you don't live down here, but the HS2 rail network will be coming out of London. It will be coming through sort of the southwest corner of Hertfordshire, around Watford, sort of by Hemel Hempstead, and then going up to the Midlands and the northwest. But the question is, do you think HS2 will have an overall positive or negative impact on the environment?
That's a really good question. It's going to be hard to know until it's complete. And if you look into the HS2, that phase 1 business case, you can see there's a number of impacts they've tried to quantify or monetize where possible, which will define whether it will. And it's as with a lot of things in sustainability, it's quite nuanced. So when you look at carbon impact for HS2, for example, the construction, the amount of concrete, everything that's going into it is going to have a massive amount of carbon emissions. But there's a fact that that HS2 have calculated, and I may slightly misquote this, so it's probably worth double checking me, but I think something along the lines of that. Those carbon emissions over the 120-year design life of that phase 1 equates to like less than the UK road network does in 1 month. And the reason they've put this quote out there and this research out there is because one of the potential benefits, if they get it right, is if you take passengers and freight off the road, then you might actually lower the carbon emissions for the UK in total and help us on that kind of that process towards net zero. So again, that's part of the beauty of this kind of nuanced discussion around sustainability and different factors that come in. I know another thing they're working towards is biodiversity no net loss. So they've calculated the habitats that are impacting across the route, and the idea is they put back more habitat than they put back at least the same amount of habitat that they take away. This, however, doesn't factor in ancient woodland, because that usually would mean you can't do a net gain calculation. So there's always importance to taking all the information around. So I really wouldn't like to say, to be honest, because it is such a complex project. I know it's obviously at the forefront of what they're talking about, and it's very much so on the agenda for those working on the project. But I suppose it's the classic proof will be in the pudding. We'll have to see when it eventually is completed, whether they do achieve some of these other benefits, whether they do keep their carbon emissions in construction down, whether they do increase passenger and freight numbers, whether they do hit that no net loss of biodiversity and some of these other aspects.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a non-answer there, sorry, but
no, I was going to say, yeah. So Jim's given some great context and great information there, and ultimately ended up sitting squarely on the fence. I mean, Emma or Amelia, have either of you got a binary answer to that question?
Not a binary one, no. It is exactly what Jim says. It is exactly what Jim says. It's all about balance.
Yeah, okay. And I think that's absolutely fine. And again, for those of you that are doing essay writing subjects, you're going to find yourself in a position where you're asked similar questions by that, and you have to try and come to some sort of conclusion. There's a question there that I've accidentally just deleted it, but I think I can paraphrase Amelia. It's around choosing sciences for A level. So physics, biology, chemistry. You're obviously a big advocate of biology as a subject, but what do you think the merits of chemistry or physics might be in your understanding or progression towards this sort of career?
I think a science A level is a science A level. It's so highly commended, and I think biology can be seen to have a different sort of assessment. So I think the way that they ask your questions in the exams, I remember I struggled with the way you'd have to word them to get the marks, even though you kind of know the theory. you have to word them in a way that it really gets all that information in there in one go. So I think if you wanted to go down the sustainability route in environment, I'd probably lean towards, yeah, chemistry and biology really, but any science is going to get you into university if you do it well. So yeah, really highly commended degree and A-level, yeah.
Okay, and I do apologise, I haven't done justice to that question because I did accidentally delete it as I was reading it. If we haven't answered it, please do submit it, and I'll make sure that we do in the next 5 minutes before we finish. And then Emma, I'm going to finish with a question for you then, and it's do you think it's likely that the government will meet the climate change targets it has set, or do you think more urgent action is needed?
That's such a good question. I love it. So to be honest, they have actually written into legislation that they have what's known as milestone targets. So they obviously have the really big targets out there in terms of, you know, we want to achieve net zero by this year, and it keeps changing. It was 2050. It's now depending on obviously like if you sit within different local authorities, if you sit within different boroughs, then obviously it could be 2030, it could be 2040. But in terms of the government's big master plan, which they have with this new legislation, is that they've actually set themselves milestone targets, and they need to make those targets, and they do basically have external groups that are going to make sure that they are on track to hit those targets. And I think the review for the next set of these targets is actually October. And there is a lot more information about this on the government's website. So if you actually look into the Environment Act and look at actually how the legislation is going to roll out, the great thing is, and how you've put your question, is that they've already written that in there for them to do. And it's almost like, because they've basically now got these external entities, like you have your climate change committee. There's one, like Jim was saying earlier, you have financial ones. There's one specifically for biodiversity. You've now got something called local nature recovery networks to help with biodiversity. There are so many entities they've now put in place to try and meet these targets. I would like to say yes, because they've done it, so they have to. But it will be really interesting to see by the end of this year to see how they are actually going with their first targets. So definitely check out the web pages to see how they've laid out their time scale, just so you kind of get to know a little bit more. But it's definitely something that us as sustainability and climate change officers are going to be following very closely.
Sure, I mean, it does feel that there's cross-party buy-in for this as well. So should the government change, I mean, obviously if the Green Party came in, you imagine it would be accelerated quite significantly. But it does seem that there's a consensus across the floor there that this is something that is really important, and those targets, they will strive to meet those. Amelia, so the question that I deleted has come back in. So I wanted to know if science degrees at university have any value to do sustainability, such as physics or physical geography.
Yes, definitely. I would say, yeah, any science is, as I was saying earlier, such a highly commended degree. It has so many modules in it across the 3 or 4 years that it may be. It might even offer you a placement, which is definitely worth looking at. As I said before as well, I wasn't looking for degrees with placements, which some do sandwich years. So you can do 2 years study, take a year out, go into the industry, come back and do your final year. And that in a way would be really useful, because then you could do your final year project on something that you think, wow, this is amazing. I really want to get this out there as new research, new bit of study. So you can tailor it to anything you want in that final project. So you pick the degree, you pick your modules to a certain extent, and you can, you know, combine physics with anything or chemistry with anything and make it your research and what you'd like to give back out there. So yeah.
Sure. Okay, thank you. Well, that was the final question that we've had submitted, and it very neatly takes us up to 5:30. So can I just ask those of you that are watching, particularly those of you that are watching live, if you've got any feedback about this webinar or ways that it's been really useful for you, or something that you could share with us, please drop that into the questions now, because we may well use that to promote these webinars to other students and other schools. So if there's anything that you've got specifically that's helped you today, do put that in there. Just before we go, we wanted to share with you some details of some websites or resources that you might want to go and have a look at for a bit of further reading that will help you understand this industry. So Jim, there's a couple of reports on there that you've recommended. So the United Nations one and the State of Nature. Just to explain, what would they tell somebody?
So yeah, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals help. They really give a framework for me of all the aspects we need to be considering when we talk about sustainability and that really complex, nuanced topic we've been talking about for the last hour. In fact, more than what we've been talking about for the last hour, because we've been focusing on the environmental side, but there's no huge social and economic inputs into that as well. So that's a really good framework, which I think helps frame that discussion. The other one is the State of Nature report, which was released in 2019, I think, and that is very much so coming from the aspect of nature and biodiversity, very focused on the UK, and slightly worrying, unfortunately. So I think, as I alluded to before, we're quite nature depleted, and maybe we don't always realise it. So it just kind of helps frame that, and reading that report gave me a little bit more of a kick up the bum, I suppose, that this is something that I want to start, investing more time in, and it gave me a bit of inspiration to do more. So maybe I'll do the same for others who read it.
Yeah, for sure. And then the other QR codes I put on there will take you to Jim's organisation, Nature Positive. That QR code will take you through if you want to find out a little bit more about them. Equally, RSK Wilding, I've given a QR code with a link through to there. And then the other one in the top right, that might be of interest for you. I expect you're probably not looking for jobs right now, but this is a website that contains details of green economy jobs that are out there at the moment. So if you have a look at that one, it might be a good research, and you can read what's in the job description. Again, probably not something that you need to know for a few years yet, but could be some good research for you as well. Thank you. I'm getting some good feedback in there, which we will, which I will respond to. We've got your email addresses from when you've registered, so if you've asked us to follow up on something, then we can. Just before we go, just to make you aware of maybe the first of these webinars that you've attended. We've done 50 of them now across a variety of different areas. Last week we covered sports broadcasting. Next week the coming weeks we'll have one on joining the police as well. So hopefully there's something in there for everybody. You may well find out if you have a look through them that there's other ones that you might want to have a look at, or that your friends and family might want to have a look at as well. Do check out the HOP website and have a look at our social media channels as well. Firstly, thank you to all of you, particularly those of you watching as a live audience today, and for submitting some really fantastic questions. I know that Amelia, Emma and Jim were really impressed by the standard of questions you asked, and these are really good things for you to be thinking about as well. But finally, let me thank our panelists, so Amelia, Emma and Jim, for giving up their time this afternoon to share some insights into their own particular worlds. Thank you so much, guys, for coming in and sharing those, and in preparation for this as well. So we really hope this has been enjoyable, and we really hope this will help you, inform you and inspire you to make your next steps into environmental sustainability. So have a good evening, everybody, and good night.